The first thing I saw was a man standing in the road behind my car, and the second was the fence at the end of the highway, which told me I'd already gone too far to be anywhere I understood. I was supposed to be halfway to my brother's place in northern Utah by then, not creeping through a black stretch of nowhere with my headlights bleaching the fog and the trees beyond it. I'd mixed up the dates for one of our plans. Completely my fault. And by the time I realized it, there was no sensible way to fix it except to keep driving through the night. I was tired in that dull, heavy way that makes your thoughts feel sticky. I'd been on the road for hours. My coffee had long since gone cold, and every mile had started to look the same. Empty pavement, dark shoulders, a sky so low and starless it felt pressed against the windshield. That was probably why I missed the exit. The GPS told me to get off the highway after what felt like forever on the same road, but I was rubbing my eyes and trying to stay focused, and by the time I glanced down again, I'd already passed it. I remember that strange little drop in my stomach when I saw the screen reroute. At first I thought, fine, it'll correct itself. Maybe there was another road. Maybe I'd only lost a minute. But the loading circle just kept turning and turning and turning, like the phone couldn't quite decide what world I was in. I kept driving anyway, looking for the next place to turn around. There wasn't one. A mile or so after the exit, I passed a black sedan sitting on the shoulder with its hazard lights blinking a weak amber through the dark. It looked ordinary enough, the kind of car you'd barely register in daylight. At that hour, though, it seemed almost staged there, like somebody had pulled over and vanished into the woods. I slowed a little, mostly out of habit, scanning for a turnaround or a widened section of road. The lane felt narrower than it should have, the pavement rougher, the edge lines fading in and out under my headlights. Then the highway began to change in a way that made my skin tighten. It wasn't gradual enough to notice all at once, but by the time I did, it was unmistakable. The shoulders shrank. The center line looked older, less maintained. The forest on both sides drew in close, thick with wet black trunks and tangled undergrowth that swallowed my headlights almost immediately. It no longer felt like a highway at all. It felt like I'd driven onto some forgotten seam in the land, a road that had been left behind and reluctantly kept alive by the odd car that still passed through it. The kind of place where you're not sure whether you're supposed to be afraid of the woods or of whatever the woods have learned to hide. I started getting that prickling feeling at the back of my neck that says, very clearly, leave. But there was nowhere to leave to. No pullout, no driveway, no crossover, no intersection, just the road stretching ahead through the dark like it expected me to keep going. I finally pulled over where the asphalt widened by a foot or two, mostly because I needed to think, and because the fear was beginning to drown out the tiredness. I sat there gripping the wheel, staring at the GPS, still loading. I tried my phone. No signal, no data, no map app, nothing. I tapped the screen until it flashed at me, and then went dead again, like even the little rectangle in my hand wanted nothing to do with where I was. When I looked outside, I couldn't see much through the glass. No streetlights, no houses, no signs. Only a darkness so complete it seemed to absorb the edge of the road. I got out because staying in the car suddenly felt worse, and the night air hit me cold and damp, carrying the smell of pine and wet dirt and something else underneath it, something stale and earthy that I didn't want to identify. Both sides of the road were thick forest, packed so close together I couldn't even see a meaningful gap between the trees. I couldn't see the other direction of the highway either, which made the whole thing feel even more wrong, as if the road had stopped being a road and had become a corridor carved directly through wilderness. Somewhere back the way I'd come, there had to be an off-ramp or a junction or some place where the lanes split and then met again. I just had no idea how far away it was, or how far ahead I'd have to go before I found anywhere to turn around. For a few seconds I considered doing the stupid thing and just driving back the way I'd come, even if that meant going the wrong way for a while. But the thought of it made my stomach knot. It felt unsafe, reckless, and weirdly disrespectful, like something out there would notice. Besides, I'd already gone far enough that backing up all that distance in the dark sounded miserable even before I factored in my nerves. So I told myself to keep going. There had to be some kind of turnaround ahead. Before I got back into the car, I glanced over my shoulder down the road I'd come from. That was when I saw the figure walking toward me. He was still far away, little more than a shape with movement, but there was no mistaking that it was a person. He was in the middle of the road, coming straight in my direction, slow and steady, his steps hidden by the sound of my own heartbeat roaring in my ears. For some reason I immediately thought of the black sedan with its hazards on. Maybe this was the driver. Maybe he'd walked off to check something and was heading back. Even as I had that thought, it felt wrong. Who leaves a car on the shoulder of a dead road in the middle of the night and starts walking toward the woods? I slid back into my driver's seat, shut the door, and kept moving. The further I went, the uglier the road became. The pavement broke up in spots. The lane markings vanished almost entirely. The headlights picked up a pale scatter of gravel at the edges, and every few seconds I caught flashes of brush crowding right up against the shoulder like the forest was trying to reclaim the strip of road, inch by inch. I kept expecting a sign, a fork, a gravel access point, anything that would let me turn around. But the road simply narrowed into a long, stubborn line of asphalt leading deeper into nowhere. Then, about half a mile after I'd pulled over, it ended. Not tapered off, not merged, ended. A roadblock fence stood across the pavement, blocking the entire width of the road, as if someone had decided the world stopped there. The barrier was old and utilitarian, its metal pale in my headlights, and beyond it the road seemed to continue only as a darker, rougher strip, maybe gravel, maybe dirt, maybe nothing I should have been looking at all. I put the car in park and got out again, because by then I needed to know whether I was really seeing. The air felt colder out there, stiller. The woods didn't rustle the way woods usually do at night. They just waited. At first I focused on the fence. It looked legitimate enough, like it had been there for years. Maybe the road was closed. Maybe some maintenance crew had blocked it off, and the GPS hadn't caught up. That explanation should have made me feel better. It didn't, because once my eyes adjusted, I saw there was someone standing near the tree line. I didn't notice him right away. At first he seemed like a mistake in the dark, one of those vertical pockets where the shadows collect and make shapes your brain insists on turning into people. I stared harder, squinting into the trees, and slowly the shape sharpened into a figure standing just beyond the edge of the road. He wasn't moving. He was simply there, facing me, and the longer I looked, the more impossible it felt that I hadn't seen him immediately. The skin on my arms tightened into gooseflesh. I remember taking one step back, then another, my mouth dry, my pulse thudding in my ears. I didn't even get time to turn fully before I felt someone right behind me. I nearly screamed. He was so close that when I spun around, I came face to face with him. Same man I'd seen walking down the road. Close-cropped beard, buzz cut, dark hood up over his head. He looked solid and real and completely silent, like he'd stepped out of the trees and into my space without making a single sound. I had not heard him approach. Not a crunch of gravel, not a footstep, nothing. I froze. For a long second, neither of us moved. The headlights of my car threw his face into harsh relief, carving shadows beneath his eyes and along his beard. He seemed oddly calm, almost patient. "Road's closed," he said. His voice was low and flat, but there was something careful in it. "Can't get out this way, ma'am." I mumbled an apology before I even knew what I was apologizing for. I could hear how shaky I sounded, and I hated that. My eyes kept darting past him toward the trees, back toward the dark shape I'd seen standing there. I wanted to ask if he'd seen anyone else. I wanted to ask what this place was. I wanted to ask why my phone had died the second I got near it. Instead, I heard myself say that I'd thought I saw something out there, but I was probably just exhausted. That was the wrong thing to say. I saw his expression change before he even spoke. It wasn't dramatic. No sudden sneer, no obvious threat. Just a subtle stiffening around the mouth and eyes, like some internal switch had flipped. He lowered his head a little, forcing me to meet his gaze under the hood. "What exactly did you think you saw?" His tone was still almost polite, which made it worse. Not angry, not curious in a normal way either. More like he already knew the answer and was disappointed I'd said it out loud. My throat locked up. The man looked at me with that steady, measuring stare, and I realized with a burst of sick clarity that I did not want to answer him. Not here. Not with the woods behind him. Not with the road blocked behind me. Not with the night pressing in on all sides. Nothing, I said, or tried to. It came out as a thin, broken whisper. I didn't wait to see whether he would respond. I turned, reached for the door, and practically fell back into the driver's seat. My hands were trembling so badly I fumbled the keys twice before I got them into the ignition. As the engine caught, I saw him moving closer to the window, and that was all it took. I slammed the car into reverse and backed up hard enough that the tires skidded. I made a three-point turn so fast it nearly became a mess, but somehow I managed it, and then I was driving back the way I'd come, faster than I should have been on a road that narrow and broken. I didn't look in the mirror. I didn't want to see whether he was following me. The drive back felt longer than the drive in. Every stretch of darkness seemed to stretch tighter around the headlights. My pulse was still pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I kept expecting to hear something strike the back of the car, or see a shape dart from the trees into the road, but nothing happened. The silence was worse than any sound would have been. A few minutes later, I passed the black sedan again, still sitting on the shoulder with its hazard lights blinking steadily like a slow, warning pulse. I didn't slow this time. I just stared forward, gripping the wheel until my knuckles hurt, and kept going until I finally saw the exit ramp I had missed before. When I got back onto the main road, the world seemed to widen around me all at once. The highway looked ordinary again, almost disappointingly normal, as if the place I'd just left had been a bad dream I could barely prove to myself had happened. But it didn't feel normal, not even close. I kept driving until the GPS recovered and the screen stopped pretending it didn't know where I was. I never saw the road behind me again, and I didn't stop until I was far enough away that the woods were nothing but a dark smear in the rearview mirror. I still don't know exactly what was out there. I know there was a road that shouldn't have ended the way it did. I know there was a man standing by the trees who seemed to be watching me before I even noticed him. I know there was something in the dark that made that man's voice change the instant I admitted I'd seen it. And I know this much for certain. If I had stayed even a little longer, or if I'd told him the truth about what I saw, I don't think I would have gotten an explanation. I think I would have gotten an invitation. It started with a chill, not the winter kind, but something colder, crawling under my skin as I drove through the silent stretch of highway that felt like it hadn't seen a soul in hours. The clock barely nudged past 7 in the evening when I left, deciding to make the trip home overnight. The road ahead was monotonous, endless, straight and deserted, like some kind of forgotten artery slicing through an empty landscape. For the first 5 hours, nothing changed. Darkness swallowed the world whole. The hum of the engine and the white dashed lines flashing beneath my tires were my only companions. Around midnight, something shifted. Far off, a pair of headlights appeared, a solitary car streaking toward me on the opposite lane. On a road this barren, you'd notice a single set of lights from miles away. For a few minutes, I watched as those beams carved a line through the inky blackness. Then, like a ghost slipping past, the car sped by. I barely gave it a second thought until, in the rear-view mirror, I caught something strange, the red glow of brake lights popping on. The car slowed abruptly, then jerked sideways, cutting across the median's wide grassy ditch in a reckless U-turn that made no sense. There were no brakes in the dividing barrier, but somehow the car plunged into the ditch, snagged its tires on uneven earth, and clawed back up to my side of the highway. For a moment, I thought maybe the driver had lost their way, desperately needing to turn around or find something. But then the headlights slid up directly behind me, steady and almost too close for comfort. The driver matched my speed, never passing, never swerving away. My unease grew heavier with every mile. It was pitch dark, and the high beams suddenly began to flicker, long flashes, repeated in patterns like someone was trying desperately to say something. I blinked, hoping my eyes were playing tricks. There was no one else on this lonely stretch. No other cars, no streetlights, just us. The message was clear. The flashing was for me. My heart thumped wildly as I wrestled with what to do. Turn around? Speed up? Pull over? But where? There was no sign of civilization, no rest stops, no gas stations, nothing but the endless black road and the relentless flickering of lights behind me. Then, finally, a glow appeared far ahead, an exit sign announcing a rest area 3 miles down. Relief and dread churned inside me. At least there would be other cars, other people, safety in numbers, or so I told myself. I took the ramp, which twisted down and under the highway in a spiraling tunnel that dropped me into a hollow, so isolated it felt like a cave carved from the side of the earth. The rest area was a vast emptiness. A parking lot stretched out below shadowed hills, the building a small, nondescript structure with dull lights and a single vending machine buzzing faintly inside. I pulled into a space near the building, flicking to the mirror constantly. No headlights behind me. The car hadn't followed. I let out a shaky breath, the tension easing just a little, but exhaustion wrapped tight around my limbs. I needed to move, eat something, even if it was just from a vending machine. But when I stepped inside, it was dead silent except for the machine's mechanical hum, and the machine itself was dark, completely dead. Turning to leave, I spotted another vehicle parked next to mine. No other cars anywhere, but this one was too close, too deliberate. The windows were black, tinted so heavily that I couldn't see inside, and the high beams glared like twin eyes piercing through the night. My breath caught. The prickling sense of eyes watching me shot cold through my skin. I moved slowly back to my car, every shadow suddenly suspicious. Sliding inside, I fumbled with the key, desperate to leave. But the engine was silent. No click, no chug, nothing. My heart slammed against my ribs as adrenaline surged. I was trapped. Hands shaking, I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. My voice barely steady. I explained the situation. The car tailing me on the highway. The strange flashing lights. The sudden stop at the empty rest area, and now my car wouldn't start. The operator's tone shifted immediately. She snapped questions faster, her voice tight and packed with urgency, as if I'd just walked into a nightmare she'd heard before. While I spoke, the ominous car edged slow behind mine, then slid close enough to block my escape, parked just feet from my bumper as if sealing me inside a cage. Then I saw it, movement. The door creaked open. A tall man, bundled in a dark brown winter jacket, stepped into the weak light, his figure looming as he drifted toward my window. He didn't say a word or fumble for the handle. Instead, he just stood there, silent and chilling, staring straight at me through the glass. The phone pressed to my ear was my only tether to safety as I described every second. Minutes felt like hours as the man circled my car, his steps noiseless but deliberate. He traced slow paths around the vehicle, stopping to peer inside, as if searching for something, and then finally, without warning, he retreated back to his car and slipped away into the night. The silence crash-landed around me until flashing blue lights tore through the dark. A police cruiser pulled in, and relief flooded me. The officer quickly gathered details and told me another unit was en route to assist with my car. But before easing off, the first cop's expression hardened, urgency spiking in his voice, as he talked about chasing down the mysterious driver. They told me later the man had cut the ignition cable, a cold, calculated move that left me vulnerable. The thought of how effortlessly my escape was stolen sent a fresh wave of dread through me. Even now, days later, part of me can't shake the image of that silent figure circling my stranded car, the way he watched without saying a word, the strange, chilling calm of each step he took. What had he hoped to find? What game was this? The flashing lights, the relentless pursuit, the sudden stop in the middle of nowhere. It all felt like part of something darker, something waiting just beneath the surface. I still don't know what he wanted, but I keep replaying those moments, trapped and helpless, and hoping that someone out there might have seen something similar, something that could explain the quiet, haunting. The first thing I heard was my own radio hissing my truck's description back at me. And for a second, I honestly thought somebody was sitting in the cab beside me. Gray cab, white doors, white trailer, blank sides. Then it named the direction I was driving, like it could see through the dark and into my windshield. And after that, the voice vanished as fast as it had come. I was hauling for a local outfit out of Montana, One of those companies that sends you all over the country but keeps your home base in the middle of nowhere. Most of my routes ran through long stretches of Midwest road, the kind that seemed to go on forever under a low, black sky. Out there, the highways thin out, the traffic gets sparse, and whole hours can pass without a single set of headlights appearing in either direction. Even other truckers were rare on those runs. Most nights, the only company I had was the engine rumbling under me, the painted lane lines slipping by, and the occasional static whisper from my CB. I always left channel 19 on. It was habit more than anything else. You never knew when another driver might need help, or when you might just want to hear another human being to keep yourself awake. Most nights it stayed dead quiet. A little crackle now and then, a burst of distant chatter, then nothing again. That night started the same way. I was heading to a regular supplier on a regular road. The kind of trip I could almost drive with my eyes half closed because I'd done it so many times before. The cab was dim, lit only by the instrument panel and the glow from the dash clock. The road ahead was a ribbon of darkness, flat and empty, with the occasional reflector catching my headlights and flashing back like a tiny pale eye. It was about 1 in the morning when the radio changed. At first it was just a weak crackling, faint enough that I almost ignored it. I figured it was bad reception. Maybe some trucker coming in and out of range somewhere far off in the dark. Then I heard a man's voice underneath the static, low and distorted, like it was bleeding through from another world. I couldn't make out the words. It sounded clipped and broken, chopped up by the radio's hiss. I frowned, reached over, and flipped the radio off. Then I turned it back on. Nothing, just silence and the soft hum of the road. I let it go for a while and kept driving. The darkness stayed the same. No houses, no exits with lit signs, no gas stations, no other semis sliding past in the opposite lane. The landscape on both sides was just empty, dead stretches of field and roadside brush, swallowed by night. I started to relax again, telling myself the radio had simply picked up some stray transmission. It happens. Out there, weird things happen all the time, or at least they feel weird when you're tired enough. Then the CB kicked back on. Not voices this time, just static. At first it was soft, almost harmless. Then it grew louder and louder. The sound thickened until it filled the cab like a swarm of insects trapped in metal. It got so sharp and ugly that I actually glanced at the radio, wondering if the speaker had blown. I was seriously thinking about shutting the whole thing off and just driving in silence the rest of the way. But before I could reach for it, the voice came through again. It was the same man. I knew it instantly, even though I couldn't have told you how. There was something wrong with the way he spoke. Not just the scratchy interference, but the rhythm of it. Too calm, too flat, like he wasn't talking to a person at all, just reading from a list somewhere in a dark room. I leaned closer without meaning to, straining to catch every broken fragment. Gray cab, white doors, white trailer, blank sides. My stomach tightened so fast it felt like I'd dropped a step in the dark. He was describing my truck, not some truck like mine. Mine exactly, the color, the trailer, even the blank sides where there should have been company markings, just like ours always had on long haul. He kept going, and then he gave the direction I was traveling in, as casually as if he were reading mile markers off a page. And then he cut off. The signal dissolved into a weak, empty hiss, then into nothing but a soft fuzz that seemed almost too quiet after what I'd just heard. I let the radio sit there sputtering for a few minutes while I stared straight ahead and tried to process what the hell had just happened. My hands had gone damp on the wheel. I checked both mirrors, then the side mirrors again, then the stretch of road behind me through the cab's little rear window. Empty, completely empty. No headlights, no vehicles, no one. That should have been impossible. If somebody had been close enough to describe my truck in detail over the CB, they should have been close enough for me to see them. But there was nothing out there at all. Just the road, the dark, and the low drone of my tires. I finally shut the radio off because the sound of that dead channel was making my nerves crawl. I tried calling a buddy back at the warehouse. I needed to hear a normal voice. Someone familiar. I wanted to say, "Hey, listen, Something's wrong with the radio. Maybe it's messing up. Maybe I'm just overtired. But the call wouldn't go through. No service. Of course there was no service. Out there never was when you needed it. For the next 30 minutes, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd heard something I wasn't supposed to hear. I kept replaying the voice in my head. The way it sounded like it was coming from somewhere far away and right next to me at the same time. The exactness of the details. The way it had named my truck as if it had studied it. I kept glancing into the dark roadside, half expecting to catch headlights falling into my lane, but there was nothing. I knew there was a gas station up ahead. A small one, the kind with maybe 2 pumps and a tiny convenience store if you were lucky. My tank wasn't dangerously low, but I decided I'd stop anyway. Partly to refuel, partly because I wanted to ask somebody, anybody, if they'd ever heard anything strange on that stretch of road. Maybe the attendant would know something. Maybe it was a local prank. Maybe there was some weird CB interference out there that nobody had bothered to mention. The station was smaller than I remembered and more isolated than I liked. It sat alone beside the highway like something that had been left behind by accident. A few weak lights buzzed overhead, shining on cracked concrete and stained pumps. The little store was closed, its windows dark, the door locked, and there wasn't a soul in sight. I still pulled in. The place felt wrong the second I rolled off the road. Not just abandoned, but watched. The kind of feeling that makes the back of your neck tighten even when there's no visible reason for it. I parked by a pump, climbed down, and started fueling. The night was cold enough to bite, and the smell of gasoline hung heavy around me, sharp and familiar. Somewhere beyond the station, a faint wind moved across the flat land, stirring the weeds and making a low rustling sound that reminded me of someone whispering just out of earshot. I remember standing there with the nozzle in my hand, staring at the dark windows of the closed store and thinking I shouldn't be there. It wasn't fear exactly. It was worse than that. It was the sensation that the emptiness around me wasn't empty at all, that something was holding still inside it and waiting for me to notice. I didn't wait to fill the tank completely. I cut it off early, got back into the cab, and started to pull away. That was when I saw the truck. It was coming from the direction I'd just come from, rolling slowly down the road with no headlights on at all. At first, all I caught was the outline, then the shape of it as it got closer to the station lights. It was old, battered, and rust-streaked, the body dull and worn like it had spent years rotting under bad weather. The front end looked crooked somehow, and the whole vehicle had that ugly, used-up look of something that should have been retired long ago. It drifted toward the station as if it intended to turn in. Then it saw me. Or maybe the driver did. The truck stopped dead in the road, right there in the darkness, lights off, engine probably idling low enough that I couldn't hear it over my own. It just sat there for a second, motionless and patient, as if the driver was deciding what to do now that I'd appeared. That, more than anything, made my skin crawl. A normal person would have at least flashed lights or signal. This thing did nothing. It simply waited, hidden in the dark like it didn't want to be seen. I pulled out and got back on the highway fast, my pulse still jumping. For a few minutes I tried to convince myself I'd misread the whole thing. Maybe the truck had just been driving without headlights, which was reckless but not impossible. Maybe the driver had been tired. Maybe nothing, but the uneasy feeling only got stronger. Something about the whole scene had the flavor of a setup. A mile, maybe 2. That's all I got before I saw the next problem. There was a car sitting in the road, not on the shoulder, not halfway off the lane, right in the middle, angled a little sideways like it had skidded to a stop. Its taillights weren't on, no hazard lights, nothing. It looked like it had just been abandoned in the dark, and in front of it stood a man, waving both arms. He started toward me the second my headlights hit him, moving fast, almost desperate, like he needed me to stop right then and there. I eased off the gas, confused more than anything else. As he came closer, I could see him clearly enough to notice he didn't seem injured. His clothes were intact. He wasn't limping. There was no blood, no broken glass, no obvious damage to the car behind him. He looked like a man who had simply chosen to stand in the middle of a lonely highway and signal trucks down. He raised one hand higher, as if telling me to slow, to stop, to help. But something was off. The car behind him didn't look wrecked. Nothing about the situation made sense. Out there was no reason for a random vehicle to be blocking the lane. No curve in the road, no obstacle, no ditch or wreckage. Just a man, a car, and the open darkness around them. And then I caught movement in my mirror. At first it was just a shape emerging out of the black road behind me. Then headlights didn't come on, but the outline of that old truck from the gas station became unmistakable. It had followed me. It was back there, closing in, and the second I saw it, everything in my body went cold. Trap. That word hit me so hard it was almost physical. I didn't think. I just stomped the man in front of me had committed to the act so fully that he didn't even jump aside right away. For one horrible second it looked like I was going to hit him. I jerked the wheel, the trailer lurching behind me, and squeezed between him and the car with inches to spare. I think the trailer may have clipped the side of the vehicle, maybe scraped the paint or the mirror, but I was too busy trying to survive to care. The whole rig shuddered as I forced it through, the tires whining against the pavement, and then I was past them both, heart hammering, breath locked in my chest. In my mirror, I saw the old truck stop beside the man. Another man got out, then another movement, a sharp gesture, maybe one of them shouting at the other. I couldn't hear a thing over my engine, and the blood roaring in my ears. But whatever was happening back there didn't look like surprise. It looked like irritation, like something had gone wrong. That image stayed with me. Not the blocked road, not the phantom voice on the CB, not even the old truck creeping behind me with its lights off. It was the sight of those two men together, acting like they knew each other, like this wasn't random roadside chaos at all, but a plan that had almost worked. I drove straight until I found a place with enough signal to call the police, and even then it took everything I had to explain what I'd seen. They listened, asked questions, took notes, told me they'd check the area. By the time they got there, though, the road was empty. No truck, no car, no men, just black asphalt and miles of silence stretching out in both directions like nothing had ever happened. I never got a clean answer. Maybe the guy on the radio had been scanning for truckers and found a way to target me. Maybe the old truck at the gas station had been working with the car on the road. Maybe it was some ugly, coordinated attempt to pull me over on an isolated stretch where nobody would hear me if things went bad. I don't know. I still don't know. But I know this. That voice on the radio had my truck's exact description before I ever saw a single vehicle. It knew the direction I was headed, and the truck at the station had been waiting in the dark like it was supposed to meet somebody. I've driven lonely highways since then, and I've heard plenty of strange things crackle over the CB. Nothing like that, though. Nothing that sounded so calm and so certain while it described me as if I were already found. I'm just glad I trusted the knot in my gut when it screamed at me to leave that station. I'm glad I didn't get curious enough to stop and ask questions when the road started lying to me. Because somewhere out there, on one of those empty black stretches between towns, there were people ready to make me disappear, and one wrong decision would have left my truck sitting abandoned on the side of the highway with nobody ever able to explain why.